Every financial collapse leaves a signature. Not a single catastrophic mistake, the way the movies tell it, but a pattern, a repeating shape you can find in bankruptcy filings and foreclosure records and retirement accounts that never quite recovered. Forensic accountants who study household financial ruin will tell you the same thing insurance investigators say about arson. Nobody burns their own house down with one match. It's 12 small fires, lit separately, each one individually defensible, that finally add up to the same result. Tonight we're going to walk through 12 of those fires, one at a time, and I want to say plainly before we start what this is and what it isn't. What follows is a breakdown of documented spending patterns, publicly available research, and industry data. It is not individualized financial advice, and it is not an argument that you should never travel, never insure anything, or never send a child to private school. Your household's genuine needs, your safety margin, your risk tolerance, your children's education, those are yours to weigh, and they will differ from your neighbors. What I am going to show you is the gap between the necessity you actually need and the premium version of that necessity you were sold instead, 12 times over, and how that gap compounds across a working life into a number large enough to change when you retire, or whether you retire at all. Picture a grid, 12 panels, and we're going to fill it in one square at a time. Panel 1. The most expensive mistake hiding in plain sight in almost every driveway in the country, and I want you to notice the split immediately. On the left side sits the genuine necessity, reliable transportation that starts every morning and gets you to work. On the right side sits what most people actually financed, a $50,000 depreciating asset, purchased with a loan stretched out past 7 years just to make the payment survivable. The current national average transaction price for a new vehicle has been sitting in the high 40,000s and pushing past $50,000 through this year, and the average monthly payment on a financed new car recently crossed $700 for the first time on record. Now follow the curve. In year 1, that vehicle loses roughly 20% of its value the moment it leaves the lot. By year 3, it's lost closer to 40%. The loan, meanwhile, doesn't care about the curve, it just keeps demanding the same payment against an asset worth less every single month. Compounded across a working life of new car purchases every 5 to 7 years instead of driving a reliable used vehicle into the ground, the gap runs into the hundreds of thousands of dollars by retirement, not because cars are evil, but because the premium version of transportation was sold to you as the only responsible option. Panel 2, right next to it. The phone in your pocket. Genuine necessity, a working device that lets you call, text, and function in modern life. Premium version, an annual upgrade cycle to the newest model, often financed through a payment plan bundled so seamlessly into your carrier bill that it barely registers as debt at all. This is one of the quieter fires, because no single upgrade feels like a decision, it feels like a default. But a phone held for 4 years instead of upgraded every year, on the exact same underlying technology, is a difference that, run across 4 decades, buys a genuinely meaningful chunk of a retirement account, just from one bounded, boring decision made differently. Panel 3, and here's where I need to slow down and correct something, because precision matters more in this section than almost anywhere else in this video. You've almost certainly heard some version of the claim that organic groceries are a meaningfully healthier necessity, worth the premium, backed by science. Read these words carefully, because the actual science says something narrower. A comprehensive systematic review led by researchers at Stanford, published in 2012 in Annals of Internal Medicine, a peer-reviewed medical journal, analyzed more than 200 studies comparing organic and conventional food. Their conclusion: no strong evidence that organic food is meaningfully more nutritious than its conventional counterpart. Organic produce did show reduced pesticide residue exposure, that part is real and worth naming honestly, but the broad nutritional superiority that justifies a 30 to 60% grocery premium simply isn't supported by the data the way the marketing implies. On the left, a cart full of groceries covering your actual nutritional needs. On the right, the identical cart with an organic label attached and a materially higher price tag, for a nutritional benefit the research doesn't back up. Compounded across decades of grocery shopping for a family, this is not a rounding error. Panel 4. Insurance, and this one requires more nuance than any other item on this grid, because insurance genuinely protects people, and underinsurance is its own real danger. The distinction here isn't insurance versus no insurance. It's necessary coverage against catastrophic loss versus an accumulated stack of overlapping riders, extended warranties, and premium add-ons sold at the point of purchase, often duplicating coverage you already have elsewhere. On the left, a policy that protects your home, your health, and your income against genuine catastrophe. On the right, the same policy with 6 additional products layered on top, each individually small, each pitched as responsible, together quietly draining a meaningful percentage of your income every single month for protection you likely already carry somewhere else in your financial life. Panel 5, and another correction worth making plainly, because getting this wrong would undercut the credibility of everything else in this video. You may have encountered a specific claim about a 2019 Stanford study documenting a dramatic achievement gap between private and public school students. That specific study, as commonly cited, doesn't hold up to verification. Stanford does real, rigorous, and genuinely important research on educational outcomes, including large-scale work on opportunity gaps across the country, but the specific claim in circulation isn't traceable to a real, checkable source. So instead of a citation I can't verify, here's the honest, more useful observation: research comparing private and public school outcomes is considerably less conclusive than private school marketing implies, because it's extremely difficult to separate the effect of the school itself from the effect of the family resources and involvement that got a child into that school in the first place. On the left, an education that develops a capable, prepared adult. On the right, a premium version of that education whose measurable outcome advantage, once you control for family background, is a genuinely open and contested question, purchased at a cost that can rival a second mortgage. Panel 6. Travel, and here's a second correction that actually strengthens the underlying point rather than weakening it. You may have heard a claim that the average middle-class household takes close to 2 international trips a year. That number is inflated, and by a wide margin. The real picture, according to U.S. Travel Association data, is that Americans who travel internationally at all average closer to 1 trip per year, and roughly half the country doesn't hold a passport at all, meaning a large share of households take 0 international trips in a given year. That correction matters, because it means the trap isn't universal overspending on travel, it's specific: the financed vacation, the trip put on a credit card and paid off over the following year with interest, turning an occasional discretionary joy into a recurring drag on a household that only takes that trip once every year or two to begin with. On the left, a trip paid for with money already set aside. On the right, the identical trip, financed, with interest quietly extending its true cost for months after the memory has faded. Panel 7. Housing, and this is the single largest number on the entire grid for most households, so let's be precise about the distinction. On the left, a home that meets your family's genuine needs, sized appropriately, purchased within a mortgage payment that leaves real room in the monthly budget. On the right, the maximum home a lender approved you for, stretched to the very edge of what the bank calculated you could technically survive, with almost nothing left over once the mortgage, taxes, and insurance clear the account. Lenders approve based on what you can pay without defaulting. They do not approve based on what leaves you room to invest, to absorb an emergency, or to sleep at night. That gap between approved and prudent is where an entire generation of house-rich, cash-poor households currently lives. Panel 8. Subscriptions, and this is the fire nobody notices because no individual flame is large enough to see. The most widely cited research on this puts average household subscription spending north of $200 a month once every streaming service, app, software plan, and membership is actually tallied up, against a self-estimate that typically runs less than half that number. The gap between what people think they spend and what they actually spend on recurring charges is the entire mechanism here, and it's designed that way. Small enough individually to never trigger a second thought, numerous enough collectively to quietly outspend a car payment. Panel 9. The gym membership, one of the most cited examples of this pattern for a reason. Industry surveys, cited consistently for over a decade, put the share of gym memberships that go largely unused at around 2/3. That's not a moral failure. Most people don't fail at fitness because they're lazy, they fail because they bought a premium, all-access version of a necessity, movement and exercise, when a walk, a set of dumbbells, or a bodyweight routine would have delivered most of the actual health benefit at a fraction of the ongoing cost. On the left, genuine physical activity. On the right, a monthly charge for access to a building most members stop entering by February. Panel 10, and here the data is unusually strong and unusually one-sided, so I want to walk through the chart carefully. According to S&P's SPIVA scorecard, the most rigorous, longest-running study of actively managed investment funds against their benchmarks, roughly 90% of actively managed large-cap U.S. equity funds underperformed the S&P 500 over the trailing 15-year period. Not most years. Not most funds. Across entire 15-year stretches, essentially no category of active fund management, on average, beat simply owning the market itself. Now follow this curve to its logical conclusion, because this is where the 12th panel connects directly to your retirement account. A 1% annual advisory fee, charged for the privilege of professional stock picking that the data says usually underperforms a plain index fund anyway, doesn't just cost you 1% a year. Compounded across 4 decades of growth that fee never gets to participate in because it was skimmed off the top annually, that single percentage point can erase well over $100,000 of terminal retirement wealth on an otherwise ordinary portfolio. On the left, a low-cost index fund tracking the market. On the right, the same market exposure, wrapped in an actively managed product charging a premium for a service that, on average, over the long run, underperforms the thing it's charging a premium not to be. Panel 11. Children's extracurricular spending, the travel teams, the specialized coaching, the equipment upgraded every season, all sold under the umbrella of investing in a child's future. On the left, genuine developmental enrichment, activity, structure, a skill worth having. On the right, a premium, competitive track version of the same enrichment, priced as though every child on that travel team is one growth spurt away from a professional contract, when the actual statistical odds of that outcome for any individual child are vanishingly small. Panel 12, the last square in the grid, and in some ways the one that ties every other panel together, status signaling lifestyle spending, the version of a necessity chosen specifically because it's visible to other people. The car parked in the driveway where neighbors can see it. The kitchen renovated not because the old one stopped functioning but because it stopped impressing. None of these are wrong to want. What matters is being honest about which decisions are meeting a genuine need and which are meeting an audience. Now step back and look at the full grid, all 12 panels filled in, and here's the reframe that actually matters more than any single square. You did not lose your wealth to one big, reckless mistake. 12 decisions, each one individually defensible, each one made by a responsible adult trying to do right by their family, quietly stacked into a pattern that an entire set of industries spent billions of dollars in marketing to make sure would feel not just acceptable, but responsible. That's the actual mechanism. Not recklessness. Successfully marketed necessity. There's a useful callback here, to research that's held up for decades instead of one that needed correcting tonight. Thomas Stanley's research into actual American millionaires, published across his work including The Millionaire Next Door, found something that surprised almost everyone who read it at the time. Most real millionaires don't drive the luxury car, don't live in the largest house on the block, don't wear the visible signals people assume wealth requires. They tend to live meaningfully below what their income could finance, precisely because they treated the difference between necessity and premium version as something worth noticing, panel by panel, for decades, while everyone around them treated it as background noise. So here's the actual, practical takeaway, and it isn't an instruction to stop traveling, stop insuring your family, or send your kids to the cheapest possible school. It's an audit. Go through your own 12 panels, honestly, one at a time, and ask of each one the same simple question: is this the necessity, or is it the premium version of the necessity, purchased because somewhere along the way it stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like the responsible default? Some of those premium versions you'll keep, because for your specific life they're genuinely worth it, and that's a legitimate answer. Others, once you actually see them sitting there in their own panel instead of blended into the general noise of monthly expenses, won't survive the question. That audit, run honestly across all 12 categories, is the single move available to almost anyone tonight, regardless of income. But identifying the leaks is only half of the pattern. The other half, the one almost nobody talks about, is what the industry selling you these 12 premium versions are quietly counting on you never noticing about your own paycheck, and that's exactly where we're headed next.